Do you have diabetes, or do you know someone who might have diabetes? If this is the first time you've joined us here, please consider hitting that subscribe, that like, and also share and comment on this video. So what is diabetes? Diabetes is where the glucose within the blood is unable to get into the cells. Normally there's insulin, which allows that to actually take place, but that insulin may not be working as good, or there's something in the body which is slowing it down, and therefore there's too much glucose still in the bloodstream. And that's why when people measure themselves, they prick their finger and things like that, they're looking for how much glucose is in their blood. For some of you who are not familiar with diabetes as well, or if you think maybe you might be on the way to it, how are you going to know? And some of you who already are diabetic, you probably remember this as well. Initially, some of the most common symptoms that people experience is they'll get smelly urine, an increased frequency of wanting to go, especially in the middle of the night. Also, you'll get loss of appetite, or you'll get rapid weight loss or weight gain. So that's just some of the few things that people can experience. There's many other things. And if you think you're experiencing anything like this, then please do go get it checked out with your GP and just have a blood test done to see where you're sitting. So the typical ways people manage their diabetes, which you may have heard of either from the GP or from social media, is your food, and then also exercise. Food and exercise are the two main things, and the last one is sometimes people do have to take injections of insulin just to help out that process in the body. Now, if we go back 3,000 years ago and we look at the origins of when they first started noticing this, or the documented time, 3,000 years ago in the Indian texts, they talk about a condition called madhumeha. It means honey and urine. And in those times, the way they used to investigate this a little bit more, if that person may have had madhumeha, or aka diabetes, was by putting urine out for ants to approach. And if the ants liked that urine, that would indicate that that person has honey urine, and therefore diabetic. The ancient Egyptians were also quite aware of this condition. So back then they used to describe in their ancient texts, they describe a condition where there'd be severe thirst, there'd be a lot of weeing taking place and smelly urine. So again, we now know that they're talking about diabetes, and the way that they would control it and look after it is by going for a pure whole grain diet. So back in those days was wheat and barley, and because of that, they would give that person a solid diet of only those two things for about 3 to 4 months, and that would help them in some way. The next culture here was Greeks. So the Greeks invented the word diabetes mellitus. Diabetes meaning to pass through, and mellitus to mean honey. So the way the Greeks used to treat this condition is to encourage people to go horseback riding. So the moment you got on the horse and you go through that motion, I don't know how many of you have tried horse riding, but what happens is there's a lot of that motion of jumping up and down, and it's not so easy on that area down there. And so what that does, it slows the flow of urine. And this is how they used to try and control it back then. So 100 million people now have diabetes. 100 million people, and that's because of lack of exercise, foods being readily available, which aren't technically the best for us. We've replaced our fresh food diet with a lot of stuff which has now been processed. And there's a whole heap of different things there as well. Diabetes, as you know, can also lead to other things. It can lead to kidney damage, neuropathy, and also eye damage. And we'll talk about that as well today. So the food that's most commonly associated with diabetes are your sugary drinks, your cookies, your bread, your pastas, rice. So there's a couple of things there, plenty of stuff on the internet, which now you can look up yourselves. But today I want to talk about things that might not be easily accessible to you guys on the internet. So certain things that you can have in your diet that are going to help, which is more commonly known, are things like whole grains, beans, citrus fruits and veg, nuts, fresh almond milk. And there's a different specific way of making that as well. So you can actually soak your almonds overnight in some water, and in the morning just blend them down. And then you got to have a really good blender which actually gets out all the milk that can come out from there. There has been this conversation about which diet is the best to follow if you're diabetic. There's so many different options now. And the one thing that really stands out here when we look at this information is that no diet is universal. meaning there is no diet that applies to all people around the world. You can't just say that that food regime is going to be great across everyone. It doesn't work that way. Depending on the size of the person, their genetics, the way they are, the environment in which they're in. So that's the one challenge. And the second challenge there is that no approach is eternal. Means whatever's working for you right now might not be good down the line. The basic thing to try and understand is we want to feed the muscles and we want to starve the fat. So if we can make sure that we're eating the right calorie intake, but also not supplying all the bad stuff to the fat at the same time, then we're going to have a better way of controlling our sugar levels. So how do we do that? So feeding those muscles is done by knowing what foods are good in proteins. And the fats is reducing our carbohydrate intake. At this point here, let's talk about fasting, because fasting is something that's coming up more and more up the ranks over the past few months and years. There's different levels of fasting that you can do. So if you think about it, out of 24 hours, some places they advise you to fast for about 14 hours, which leaves you about 10 hours, and you shouldn't eat for about 3 hours before bed. That leaves you about 7 hours. So within 7 hours, you've got to have your daily calorie intake. Remember, we've got to feed our muscles. So you've got to have your daily calorie intake within those 7 hours. So for a lady, it's slightly lower. For a man, it's slightly greater. But it ranges from about 2,000 calories to about 3,500. So that's quite a lot to get through within that short space of time. That's one of the challenges. I want to just give you an example here with calorie intake and how it's changed over time. If you remember a long time ago, what we used to have is big share platters, and everyone in the family will pick from that platter, right, to eat. And you'd be sharing with different people, and you'd get your neighbors in and you get guests in, and then you'd all share from the same plate. Now what's happening is now we go out to a restaurant, you ask your son or your daughter and you say, right, so today what are you going to have? Are you going to have a starter? Are you going to have a main? Are you going to have a dessert? You're going to ask each individual what they're going to have for their 3-course meal. That is just the way things have progressed. So, for example, a child should have normally 800 calories, let's say, in a day. They're going to get 800 calories from that one meal. That's a lot in that one meal. And so that one off is not really the bad thing, though. When that happens regularly, that becomes a bad thing. Because you see, each human, we have something called a bliss point. When we're eating, we used to, once upon a time, eat for the taste. And when something tasted nice, we'd be satisfied. But now, it's done on volume. So the more quantity we eat, then we only reach our bliss point. And therefore, we have become accustomed to eating greater volumes of food. Thank you guys for staying with me. I hope you got something of value from this. And I look forward to catching up with you guys again soon. If there's anything you want to add or anything of this that you try or you already do, leave a comment below. It'll be great to share it with everyone in the group. Do you already use GORD? I'd love to hear. Have you already started having that in your diet? What impact has it made? How do you cook it? What kind of things do you make out of it? I'd love to know, and so would our community. So pop that in there and look forward to seeing you on the next video. Thanks so much.